Riley's fingers flew across the keyboard, her brow furrowed in concentration as she raced against the clock. The newsroom buzzed with activity around her, but she barely noticed, lost in the world of her latest article. As a rising star at the San Francisco Chronicle, Riley had quickly made a name for herself with her hard-hitting investigative pieces. At just 28, she was already being whispered about as a potential Pulitzer candidate. 2 minutes, Parker! Her editor barked from across the room. Riley nodded without looking up, her green eyes never leaving the screen. With a final flourish, she hit send and leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. Another deadline met, another story filed. She allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction before standing up to stretch her cramped muscles. "Nice work, Riley," said Jake, her fellow reporter, giving her a thumbs up as he passed her desk. "That exposé on the mayor's office is going to ruffle some feathers." Riley grinned. "That's the plan. Someone's got to keep the powers that be on their toes." As she gathered her things to head home, Riley's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Zoe. "Don't forget, blind date tonight. No excuses this time." Riley groaned inwardly. She'd been so focused on her story that she'd completely forgotten about the date Zoe had set up. After a string of disappointing relationships, Riley had sworn off dating for a while, preferring to pour her energy into her career. But Zoe had been relentless, insisting that Riley needed to get back out there. With a sigh, Riley texted back, "Fine, I'll be there. But if he's boring, I'm blaming you." An hour later, Riley found herself sitting at a trendy bar in the Mission District, nervously smoothing down her navy blue dress. She'd barely had time to run home and change, let alone prepare mentally for a date. As she sipped her gin and tonic, she found herself hoping that her mystery man would be a no-show. Just as she was about to call it quits and head home, a tall figure appeared at her table. "Riley?" asked a deep, warm voice. She looked up and felt her breath catch in her throat. The man standing before her was, quite simply, gorgeous. Tall and broad-shouldered, with tousled dark hair and piercing blue eyes, he looked like he'd just stepped off the cover of GQ. "I'm Alexander," he said with a smile, extending his hand. "Sorry I'm late. Got caught up in a meeting." Riley shook his hand, trying to ignore the spark of electricity she felt at his touch. "No problem," she managed to say. "I was running late myself." As Alexander sat down across from her, Riley couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. Maybe this blind date wasn't such a bad idea after all. Their conversation flowed easily from the start. Alexander, it turned out, was a successful architect with his own firm. He was passionate about sustainable design and had just returned from a project in Singapore. "So Zoe tells me you're a journalist," Alexander said, his blue eyes twinkling with interest. "What kind of stories do you cover?" Riley launched into an explanation of her latest investigation, surprised to find herself gesturing animatedly as she spoke. Usually, she was reserved on first dates, but something about Alexander put her at ease. "That's incredible," Alexander said when she finished. "It takes a lot of courage to take on corruption like that. I admire that." Riley felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It wasn't often that someone truly understood and appreciated the importance of her work. As the night wore on, Riley found herself laughing more than she had in months. Alexander was not only handsome, but also intelligent, witty, and surprisingly down-to-earth. They discovered a shared love of obscure indie films, a mutual addiction to crossword puzzles, and a joint disdain for pretentious food trends. "I can't believe I'm saying this," Riley said as they finished their second round of drinks. "But I'm actually glad I came tonight. I was ready to bail at the last minute." Alexander's eyebrows shot up in mock offense. "And deprive the world of this scintillating conversation? I'm shocked, Riley." She laughed, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. "Well, I've had some pretty terrible blind dates in the past. Can you blame me for being skeptical?" "Not at all," Alexander replied with a grin. "Though I hope I've managed to redeem the concept for you." As they left the bar, Riley was surprised to find that she didn't want the evening to end. They stood on the sidewalk, both seemingly reluctant to say goodbye. "There's a great little ice cream place around the corner," Alexander said suddenly. "Best salted caramel in the city. What do you say we extend this night a little longer?" Riley hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Lead the way." As they strolled through the warm San Francisco night, their hands brushed against each other. Riley felt a jolt of electricity each time it happened, and she found herself wondering what it would be like to lace her fingers through his. At the ice cream shop, they shared a massive sundae, playfully arguing over who got the last bite. When Alexander reached out to wipe a smudge of chocolate from the corner of her mouth, Riley felt her heart skip a beat. It was nearly midnight when Alexander finally walked her to her apartment building. They stood facing each other, the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. "I had a really great time tonight," Riley said softly, looking up into Alexander's eyes. "So did I," he replied, his voice low and warm. "I'd love to see you again if you're interested." Riley nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "I'd like that." Alexander leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to. But Riley found herself moving closer, drawn to him like a magnet. When their lips met, it was soft and sweet, full of promise. As she watched Alexander walk away, Riley felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. It had been a long time since she'd felt this way about someone, and it both thrilled and terrified her. Over the next few weeks, Riley and Alexander's relationship blossomed. They went on picnics in Golden Gate Park, explored hidden bookstores in North Beach, and spent lazy Sundays cooking elaborate brunches in Alexander's sleek kitchen. Riley found herself opening up to Alexander in ways she never had with anyone else. She told him about her childhood in a small Midwest town, her dreams of becoming a journalist, and the doubts that sometimes plagued her despite her success. In turn, Alexander shared his own vulnerabilities, the pressure he felt to live up to his family's expectations, his fear of failure, and his secret desire to one day design schools for underprivileged communities. As the weeks turned into months, Riley realized she was falling hard for Alexander, but with that realization came a creeping fear. Her career had always come first, and she'd seen too many relationships crumble under the weight of her ambition and long hours. One night, as they cuddled on Alexander's couch watching an old Hitchcock film, Riley's phone buzzed with a news alert. A major scandal had just broken involving a prominent tech CEO, and her editor wanted her on the story immediately. "I'm so sorry," Riley said, already reaching for her laptop. "I have to go. This is huge." Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Go. Do what you do best. I'll be here when you're done." For the next week, Riley was consumed by the story. She worked around the clock, chasing leads and conducting interviews. Alexander sent her encouraging texts and left food outside her apartment door, but she barely had time to respond, let alone see him. When the story finally broke, it was a sensation. Riley's article was picked up by national news outlets, and suddenly she was being called for TV interviews and panel discussions. In the midst of the whirlwind, Riley realized she hadn't spoken to Alexander in days. Guilt gnawed at her as she dialed his number. "Hey," she said when he answered, her voice tired but happy. "I'm sorry I've been so absent. Can I see you tonight? I want to celebrate with you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Actually, Riley, I think we need to talk," Alexander said, his tone serious. Riley felt her stomach drop. She'd heard those words before, and they never led anywhere good. That evening, she met Alexander at a quiet park near his apartment. As soon as she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. "Riley," he began, his blue eyes clouded with emotion. "I'm so proud of you and everything you've accomplished, but this past week has made me realize something." Riley braced herself for the worst. "I love you," Alexander said, and Riley's heart soared for a moment before plummeting again at his next words. "But I don't know if I can do this. Your work will always come first, and I don't know if there's room for me in your life." Tears sprang to Riley's eyes. "Alexander, no, that's not true. I care about you so much. I just got caught up in the story, but that doesn't mean you're not important to me." Alexander shook his head sadly. "I know your work is important, Riley. It's one of the things I admire most about you. But I need someone who can be present, who can build a life with me. I'm not sure that's you." As Riley watched Alexander walk away, she felt as though her heart was being torn in two. She'd finally found someone she could see a future with, and now she was losing him because of the very thing that defined her, her work. The next few weeks were a blur of misery for Riley. She threw herself into her work even more than usual, taking on every assignment she could get her hands on. Her friends worried about her, but she brushed off their concerns, insisting she was fine. It wasn't until a month after the breakup that Riley finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loss. Sitting alone in her apartment, surrounded by takeout containers and crumpled drafts of articles, she broke down and cried for the first time since Alexander had left. As she sobbed, Riley realized that she had a choice to make. She could continue on this path, letting her work consume her entirely, or she could find a way to balance her passion for journalism with her desire for love and connection. The next day, Riley marched into her editor's office and did something she'd never done before. She asked for a vacation, 2 weeks off, effective immediately. Her editor, though surprised, agreed. "You've more than earned it, Parker. Go recharge." Riley spent the first few days of her vacation sleeping and binge-watching trashy reality TV. But as the fog of exhaustion began to lift, she started to think seriously about what she wanted from her life. She loved her job. There was no question about that. The thrill of chasing a story, the satisfaction of exposing injustice, these things were integral to who she was. But was it worth sacrificing everything else? On a whim, Riley decided to take a solo trip to Yosemite. As she hiked through the majestic landscape, breathing in the crisp mountain air, she felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. She thought about Alexander, about the way he'd made her feel seen and understood. She thought about the future they could have had together, the life they could have built. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a world where her career and her personal life could coexist harmoniously. When she returned to San Francisco, Riley felt renewed and determined. She wasn't going to give up on her career, but she was going to make changes. She started by setting boundaries. No more all-nighters unless absolutely necessary, no checking emails after 8 p.m., and at least one full day off each week. As weeks passed, Riley found herself feeling more balanced and happier than she had in years. Her work didn't suffer. In fact, she found that she was more creative and productive when she wasn't constantly burning the candle at both ends. It was on one of her newly instituted days off that Riley ran into Alexander. She was browsing at her favorite bookstore when she turned a corner, and there he was, looking as handsome as ever. For a moment, they both froze, staring at each other in surprise. Then Alexander broke into a warm smile. "Riley," he said softly, "it's good to see you." They ended up getting coffee, and as they talked, Riley felt all her old feelings rushing back. But this time, instead of pushing them aside, she embraced them. "I've missed you," she said honestly, "and I've done a lot of thinking since we last saw each other." Alexander listened intently as Riley explained the changes she'd made in her life, the new perspective she'd gained. "I understand if it's too late," she finished, her heart pounding. "But I want you to know that I'm ready now, ready to build a life that includes both my work and love. If you're willing to give me another chance, I promise to make time for us, to be present, to show you every day how much you mean to me." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Riley held her breath, afraid she'd lost him for good. Then he reached across the table and took her hand in his. "I've missed you too," he said, his blue eyes shining with emotion. "And I'd like nothing more than to try again." As they left the coffee shop hand in hand, Riley felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that balancing her career and her relationship wouldn't always be easy, but she was ready for the challenge. With Alexander by her side, she felt like she could conquer anything. In the months that followed, Riley and Alexander worked together to build a relationship that supported both of their dreams. They set aside dedicated time for each other, whether it was a weekend getaway or simply cooking dinner together after a long day. Riley continued to pursue hard-hitting stories, but she also learned to delegate and prioritize. She built a strong team at the Chronicle, mentoring young reporters and trusting them with more responsibility. Alexander, inspired by Riley's passion, threw himself into pro bono projects designing sustainable housing for low-income families. Together, they found ways to use their skills and resources to make a positive impact on their community. There were still challenges, of course. Riley occasionally got caught up in a big story, and Alexander had his share of stressful projects. But they faced these obstacles as a team, supporting each other and finding compromises when necessary. 1 year after their reunion, Alexander proposed to Riley on the same park bench where they'd broken up. As she said yes through happy tears, Riley marveled at how far they'd come. Their wedding was a joyous celebration of love and partnership. In her vows, Riley promised not only to love and cherish Alexander, but also to always strive for balance and presence in their life together. As they danced under the stars at their reception, Riley looked up at Alexander and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had found a love that didn't diminish her ambition, but enhanced it, a partner who challenged her to be her best self, both personally and professionally. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Riley smiled, tightening her arms around him. "I'm thinking that this, you, me, our life together, this is the best story I've ever been a part of." Alexander laughed softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And we're just getting started," he murmured. As they swayed to the music, surrounded by their loved ones, Riley knew that he was right. Their love story was far from over, it was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take them next.